Today's shiur begins 22 lines from the bottom of Daf Lamed Ches. You will notice a little more than halfway down the page, a Mishnah. Before we begin the actual text, we glance at the side where we have a topic heading, Nara shenis arsa v'nis garsha. A Nara is a girl between 12 and 12 and a half that entered the first stage of marriage, which we call erusin, and was divorced from that point. Machlokes tanoim im yesh lo knas. There is a Tanaic controversy regarding a girl like that was nisarsa v'nisgarsha, that was raped. Is there the payment of 50 shekel kesef, the payment due, which we call the Torah imposed fine on someone who rapes a nara? The issue here, of course, is the fact that this nara entered into a marital relationship without having consummated the marriage. The consummation of the marriage, referred to as nisuin, hadn't taken place here. If it had, so she wouldn't be eligible to receive the knas, because the knas is a payment made only for a woman, a girl that's still a virgin, a besula. So the Mishnah. Naro shenisarsa v'nisgarsha, Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, ein lo knas. She is ineligible to receive the knas payment. Rabbi Akiva Omer, yesh lo knas. She does receive the knas payment. Uknoso li'atzma. The knas will be paid to her, as opposed to, in general, it would have been paid to her father. And now, as we begin the Gemara, we're presented with the sources for these Tanaic opinions. Before we begin the actual Gemara text, there is a pasuk that's worth hearing. We have it written on the side. Vorim Perek Chof Beis Pasuk Chof Ches. It reads as follows, and you can see it on the side of the Gemara. Ki motzei ish nara besula asher lo yorasa v'tafsa v'shachav ima v'nimtzo. The pasuk describes a man who finds a nara, who is a virgin that hasn't been married. She hasn't entered erusin, and he grabs her and he has intimacy with her. And regarding that, the Torah says there is a payment of 50 shekel kesef. Now the Gemara. My time of the Rabbi Yossi Aglili. You can see that we use a squiggle underline to highlight the name of the Tana that we're focusing on, or a pronoun referring to him. We should have pointed out, by the way, before we continue with the Gemara, at the end of the Mishnah, there was a dash, there was a dot underlined, uknosa li'atzma. The payment, according to Rabbi Akiva, in the Mishnah was made to the girl herself. And we mentioned that's as opposed to the payment that would have been made to in a standard Nara case to the father of the girl. That is going to be a point of discussion later on. In the meantime, the Gemara is asking now, what is the basis of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who says that if she entered erusin and was divorced, she does not receive any knas? Omar Kra, the pasuk says, Asher loy oirasa. What kind of girl receives a knas? Where the rapist has to pay that money. If she was not an orasa, she hadn't entered marriage, ha-orasa, we would infer then ein lo knas. If she was orasa, if she had entered erusin, there is no knas payment. Rabbi Akiva, now what's his take on that? What's his response to Rabbi Yossi Aglili? Asher olo rasa, when the pasuk says if she had not entered erusin, then lo'aviha, the payment is made, but to her father. Ha'orasa, the inference that had she entered erusin is an inference that's to be made, but it's for the purpose of telling us li'atzma, that the payment is made to the girl. But either way, the payment is made. The Gemara now asks, Elo me'ata, according to Rabbi Akiva's approach, the pasuk mentioned also a na'ara. The word na'ara, are we to learn it the same way as follows? V'lo bogeres, Hochinami, when the pasuk says na'ara, it tells us that a girl that's 12 to 12 and a half, there's a knas payment made. Then there's room for making the inference, not a bogeres, not if she's above 12 and a half. Now, are we going to make the inference the same way as we just did with the asher lo orasa phrase? And the result would be, hochinami, then in the case of the bogeres, de li atzma. Namely, if she was a na'ara, it would be paid to the father. And the inference is, but not a bogeres, because in the case of a bogeres that would be raped, she would be paid. We know, by the way, that that's not true. Furthermore, the pasuk also mentioned basula, virgin girl. And the word virgin leaves room for inferring velo be'ula. Should we likewise here make the same type of inference and say that if it were a be'ula is a girl that had experienced intimacy as opposed to a basula. So in the case of a bula, are you going to tell me hochinami de la'atzma that the payment is made, but it's made to her as opposed to her father? We don't say that. We don't say that in the case of the bogeres, nor in the case of the beula. Elo legamri. When we say nara not bogeres and basula not beula, we mean that those inferred individuals are legamri. No payment whatsoever is made. Hacha nami legamri. So too, when we say asher lo orasa, payment is made, and then infer ha orasa, the inference is legamri, no payment whatsoever. Omar loch Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva responds. He says, listen, I don't disagree with what you've said regarding the na'ara v'lo bogeres, regarding the basula v'lo be'ula, that the bogeres and bula receive no knas payment. However, high lo orasa, the lo orasa that Rabbi Yossi Haglili used to infer that if there was a rusin, there would be no knas. I want you to know that that expression lo orasa miboya le lechitanya is needed for something else. The other words are there for inference purposes, but not this phrase. Asher lo orasa is here to teach me something else. And it's revealed in the following Tanaic source. In this source, by the way, Rabbi Yossi Haglili will appear, and more importantly for us is Rabbi Akiva, because we're waiting to hear what does he really do with the Asher Lo Orasa. So the source says, Asher Lo Orasa. Again, that's a quote from the pasuk. Prat linarosh nisarsa v'nisgarsha she'ein lo knas. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Haglili. What kind of girl is one that generates, in the case of a rape, the knas payment? If she's lo orasa, she was never married. But if she had entered marriage, no knas at all. That's Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Rabbi Kiva Omer, yesh lo knas uknosa lovia. There is a knas payment, even if she had entered marriage and got divorced. V'hadin no sein, and logic dictates thusly. Hayil v'yavia zakai b'kesef kiddusheha v'yavia zakai b'kesef knosa. We know that a father is the one who profits the marriage money that is given when a minor or a nara enters marriage. The husband offers the money in effect to the father in exchange for her marriage. So the father gets the kesef kiddushin, and her father also, when a girl is raped, the father is the one that gets the knas. Ma kesef kiddusha, afalpishin is arsov and is garsha li'avia. Just like in the case of marriage money, a person's daughter who had entered marriage and was divorced, and then she enters marriage again. That second marriage, within the age of her being a na'ara, as long as she's still a na'ara, the marriage money that we'll call it her second marriage, that goes to the father. Af kesef knosa, af al pishnis arsav and isgarsha le'avia. Likewise, in the case of the knas for the rape, the 50 shekel kesef, even though she entered marriage and was divorced, the money will go to her father. Im kain ma talmud lo ma'asher lo orasa. And here We squiggle underline Asher Lo because this is really the focus of our attention. So what does Rabbi Akiva do? Mufne. It is an extra expression that is here to make a gezerah shava, to make a word comparison or phrase comparison. Lahakish lo v'lodun heimenu gezerah shava. The Asher Lo Orasa expression is here to enable us to connect two topics in the Torah, in order for us to learn a point from each one to the other. Ne'emar kan Asher Lo Orasa, here in the case of ones, rape, the expression lo or Asher Lo appears. V'ne'emar alon, and it says in the parsha of Mefate. Mefate is a different parsha. It's in Shmos Perachov Beis Pasuk Tes Zayin, a girl who is seduced. It says Asher Lo Orasa. Ma kan chamishim, just like in the case of the ones, the number of coins that are paid is 50. As the pasuk spells out, we have it actually quoted on the side of the Gemara in Dvorim Perek Chav Beis Pasuk Chav Tes, which deals with ones. You see the expression chamishim. It says there, and we have it written on the side, V'nosan isha sheichiv yimol avi anara chamishim kesef. So in the case of ones, 50 is spelled out. Af lahalon chamishim. So too over there in Shmos Perek Chav Beis Pasuk Tes Zayin, which deals with seduction. We now learn, because of the similar word expression, it's also 50 pieces of silver. The 50 is not spelled out in Shmos Perek Chav Beis Pasuk Tes Zayin, which we also have quoted on the side, where it reads Imoyin Yimoyin Avil L'Sita Loi Kesef Yishko Kemoyer Habasulos. It says payment is paid to the father, but it doesn't say how much. And therefore we learn from ones to mefate 50. Uma lahalon shkolim. Now the type of currency that's paid is spelled out in mefate, in seduction. There the Torah uses the word yishkol. Shkol is the verb form of the word shekel, or in plural shkolim. Afkan shkolim. So too in the case of ones, the 50 pieces of silver are 50 shekel pieces, a specific type of coinage. For Rabbi Akiva, the Gemara now asks on Rabbi Akiva, "My chozis the Asher Lo Yorasa L'Gzeira Shava Ubsulim Utebula." What is it that led Rabbi Akiva to associate Asher Lo Yorasa with the Gezerah Shava, as the basis of making the word comparison, and the word Besula, that, by the way, appears in both sections. It appears in the case of ones, and it appears in the case of seduction. And yet, in terms of making the word comparison, the word besula was not used. It was used for its inference purpose, to tell me that lim'ute be'ula, to the exclusion of be'ula from knas altogether. So what led Rabbi Akiva to approach the psukim that way? We continue at the top of Amud Beis. Amar, let's suggest the opposite. Besula l'gzeira shava. Let the word besula, which appears in both topics, rape, oines, and mefat, and seduction, and make the word comparison to enable us to conclude that the payment is 50 shekel kesef in both cases. So we'd use the word besula for the gezerah shava. V'asher. By the way, we have the psukim quoted on the side. You can see by the starred note in Shmos Chav Beis Pasuk Tes Vav. It says v'chiyifat ish besula asher lo orasa, and you can see there the word besula appears along with the asher lo orasa expression. And from the use of besula in terms of the word comparison, I'll conclude the amount that is paid, v'asher lo orasa, and that expression, prat, let me use that to exclude l'naro shenisarsav and isgarsha, that kind of girl will not generate any knas payment whatsoever. So we're choosing which expression for the gzera shava, for money amounts, and which expression to serve as an exclusionary approach? The Gemara answers, Mistabro asher lo asur l'gzeira shava. It's more likely that asher lo asur would be for the gzeira shava purposes and not to exclude a woman who already had entered marriage and was divorced. Sharei ani korei ba, I still am able to refer to her as a nara basula, as the pasuk says. True, she entered a change in legal state, but in terms of physiological change, no physiological change has taken place. So just like a regular basula is still a virgin, and that generates the knas payment when she's raped, so too if the girl underwent a legal status change but not a physiological change, she too should generate the 50 shekel kesef payment. Well, he can argue to the contrary. Basula l'gzeira shava, I'll use basula for the word comparison and money conclusion, and not exclude a be'ula. A be'ula is a woman that had experienced intimacy. And why will I not exclude the be'ula? Shareani korei ba asher lo orasa. She's a be'ula. She had intimacy, but she had never entered a marital relationship. She never experienced we'll call the legal status change. Physically, yes, there's a change, but the asher lo orasa factor, just like in the standard basula, the pasuk describes, she will receive a payment if she never entered a marriage relationship. So a be'ula as well, who never entered a marriage relationship, is the same thing. So why does Rabbi Akiva agree that basula is here for exclusionary purposes? The Gemara answers, Mistabra, it's more likely that I would mimait, I'll exclude the be'ula altogether, as opposed to excluding a girl who entered erusin and was divorced. Why? Ha ishtani gufa, v'ha lo ishtani gufa. In the case of a be'ula, this is a girl that already, it's true she didn't enter any marriage relationship, but she experienced intimacy. So upon her subsequent rape, the depreciation, the Hebrew word that is used in this context is pagam. The depreciation, or the maybe even say the deprecation, is not as great. She's already experienced intimacy. Now she's being raped, so it's not as big a step down in her life as a case of v'ha lo ishtani gufa. The case of the woman who had entered a marital relationship without consummating it, only erusin, and then was divorced. She is now still a basula like she was from before, like she was all the time. And if she is raped, so that constitutes a big pagam, and therefore it's more urgent. Their compensation is more urgently needed because of this bigger step down, so to speak. So just to review, Shitas Rabbi Akiva, Asher lo orasa is not for inference purposes like the other expressions that the pasuk featured, na'ara and basula. Asher lo orasa for Rabbi Akiva is for the gzeira shava. The basula is there for exclusion purposes. A basula generates knas and not a be'ula. For Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Hari Svara Menale. What about Rabbi Yossi Aglili? Where does he learn that the ones is paid in terms of shkalim, and the mefate is going to receive the 50 in quantity? The issue of the money amounts, where does Rabbi Yossi Aglili learn that? Rabbi Akiva learned that from Asher lo orasa, but Rabbi Yossi Aglili used Asher lo orasa for its inference value, that if she was lo orasa there is knas, Asher, if she was orasa, no knas. So the Gemara answers, Nafgale midesanya. Rav Yossi Haglili will learn the payment schedule, payment amounts, the payment quantities, the 50 shekel kesef, from the following. Midesanya. The Pasuk says, in the case of Mefat, it says, V'kesef yishkoil kemoyer habasulos. The seducer, in the event that no marriage takes place, will pay the father kemoyer habasulos, like the payment made for basulos. And Rashi elaborates, because the words as far as the Torah expression is concerned, it's not easily deciphered, but if you look at Rashi, Kemor Basulos, Minyan Hamafurish Eitzel Oines, Dahainu Chamishim. The term Habasulos, the virgins, is a reference to the virgins of the Parsha of Ones, the Torah section dealing with Ones. So when the Torah describes Mefateh, it makes a reference to the other Parsha of Ones. And from this we learn, Shihei Zeh, the payment here by Mefateh, should be Kemor Habasulos, like the money that's spelled out by Ones. Well, what was spelled out by Ones? 50. And from that, we learn back to Mefateh, also 50. Umor Habasulos, and the payment made for Ones, Kozeh, should be like this, which leads me to understand that the payment is made in terms of shkolim, because in Mefateh you have the expression ishkoil, which means shekel, as we explained earlier. The Gemara now refers to a question that we hinted to before, we introduced much earlier. Here, activate the arrows that you see to the immediate left-hand side of the Gemara text. The arrow indicates to look back to Omid Aleph, also on the left-hand side of the Gemara text. So in doing so, you'll notice back on Omid Aleph, there are two arrows that indicate to look at Omid Beis. The first arrow is that which we featured in the Mishnah, where the Narosh Nisarsav and his Garsha, according to Rabbi Kiva, Knosali Atzma, she receives the payment. She's viewed as, we'll say, an independent entity at that point, independent of her father. But if you skim down Omid Aleph, there's another arrow where Rabbi Akiva is quoted as saying that Nisarsa v'nisgarsha, there's a knas payment, and you notice the dot underlining there as well, and it says knos lavia, her father receives the knas payment. So that leads the Gemara here to say, Kashya, the Rabbi Akiva, the Rabbi Akiva. The opinions of Rabbi Akiva seem to be contradictory. Is the knas paid to her or to her father? The Gemara answers, Trey, Tanoi, Valiba, the Rabbi Akiva. There are actually two later Tanaic versions as to what Rabbi Akiva had said. Bishlama, Rabbi Akiva de Masnisen, according to Rabbi Akiva of the Mishnah, that said that the knas is paid to the girl. Lo asya gzera shava, umafka le lekra mi pashte legamri. The word comparison that we make is of value, as we explained. It doesn't come along and undo the simple reading of the pasuk altogether. There is a simple reading of the pasuk, and it had said that a knas payment is made to a girl, asher lo orasa, that leaves room to infer ha orasa, if she had been married and divorced, so the payment would be made differently. And we said, according to Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, in that case, it would be made to her as opposed to the original form of knas payment, which was made to the father. So that's what we mean by the simple reading of the pasuk is a reading that is accompanied by the ability to make an inference, and the inference by its very nature suggests something different than what the simple text says. The simple text says if she was not married, so the payment is made to the father, leaving room to infer that if she was married and divorced, something different will be. And we said, Rabbi Akiva, the Mishnah says, the payment will be made to the girl. Elo Rabbi Akiva the Brisa. Rabbi Akiva in the Brisa source that we saw on Omer Aleph that said the payment is made to the father, even in a case of Asher Orasav and his Garsha. So then Asya Gzeira Shava, the expression Asher Lo Orasa is coming as an element of the Gzeira Shava, as one part of the Gzeira Shava. Umafko mi pashte legamre, and is in effect telling us use this expression for Gzeira purposes exclusively, and not pay any attention to the simple meaning of the pasuk. When we say the simple meaning of the pasuk, we mean the simple meaning of the pasuk with its accompanying inference. And how is that? Just like if she was never married, the payment would be made to the father. According to Rabbi Akiva of the Brisa, even if she was married and divorced, the same thing applies. The payment is going to be made to the father. So where is there any attention paid or benefit from the simple reading of the pasuk, according to Rabbi Akiva of the Brisa? As we continue in the Gemara, you'll notice triangles that appear in alternating directions. So on the side of the Gemara, under the Nosei Mivneh heading, we call this a Ma'akav, an attempt to keep track. With the point facing up, it represents a tshuva, a response, and the inverted triangle in this case, kushya, it represents a question. In Shitas Rabbi Akiva, the Brisa, we're focusing on Rabbi Akiva in the Brisa source of Amen Aleph. Darusha is Garsha, a woman who had been married and divorced, and she's still a Nara. Yesh lo knas uknos lavia. There still is a knas payment, but it's made to her father. Dinze eno kfi mashmos de pashte dekro. This approach is not in accordance with the simple reading of the pasuk, the superficial or simplistic reading of the pasuk. So let's try to understand Rabbi Akiva of the Brisa. As you can see, it's where we would be in an uncomfortable position if we're disregarding the pashte dekra legamri, the simple reading of the pasuk altogether. So, is there anything that we can do about that? So the Gemara continues. Omer Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Kri Bei, read in the simple, at the simple level of the pasuk. Read the pasuk as follows: Asher lo arusa. A payment is made to a girl that is not an arusa, to the exclusion of a girl who is currently an arusa. So the pasuk would have, and we'll call the simple reading value as well. And again, I know it might sometimes sound repetitive, but we're trying to emphasize the point. When we say the simple reading, we're referring to the inference of the pasuk as well. So if we read it, Asher lo arusa, we would then be saying, if she is not currently an arusa, knas is made. If she is currently an arusa, no knas is paid. Well, that happens to be true. However, to say that that's what the pasuk is here to teach me, that's truly superfluous. Arusa baskilahi. The girl who is currently an arusa, if she is raped, the rapist, of course, is not going to pay any money. He is subject to stoning. He's raping a nara hamurasa, a married nara. And that idea that he's stoned and he's not going to pay, that has a separate source. We saw this in our previous shiur. The pasuk says, "Lo yeh osain." If there's no death penalty, then ono she'onesh, the pasuk says. But if there is a death penalty, no payment is made. So the exemption from payment is learned from Lo Yeh Oson, that other pasuk. It's not learned from an inference from our pasuk over here. The Gemara answers, it is. I need our pasuk to read Asher Lo Arusa for the inference value. Salkadai Techamina, without this pasuk, had I just had Lo Yeh Oson, Salkadai Techamina, I would have thought, Hayol v'chidush hu shechidsho torah b'knas, since the concept of a knas payment is a novelty. It's not a simple financial reparation or financial restitution based on market value loss, but it's a fine imposed from on high. It's a fixed standard 50 shekel kesef payment that doesn't regard the actual market value loss of the individual. So since it has this element of novelty to it, it's a chiddush. Afal gav de mikdam shalem. I would have thought that even though there is a death penalty, since it's novel, this novelty will apply as well. That even though there's a death sentence, there is also the requirement to pay. Therefore, there is reason for saying Asher Lo Arusa, that only if she's not married, there is payment to the exclusion of a woman who is an Arusa. The Gemara asks, Ula Rabba the Omar Chidushu Shechitshitar B'Knas Afagav de Mikto Mashalem. According to Rabba, that which we just excluded, in fact, is not the case with regard to Rabba's approach to the halacha. According to Rabba, when there is a knas payment involved, it will be paid even if the offender is also subject to a capital punishment. So then, my ikola meimar, what are we going to say about this problem of, according to Rabba, we're not going to reread the pasuk as Asher Lo Arusa to the exclusion of Arusa, because even in the case of Arusa as well, payment is to be made. So are we going to say that the Gzeira Shava of Asher Lo Orasa is going to come and exclude the simple reading altogether, as we saw in Rabbi Akiva of the Brisa, that just like if she was never married, the payment is to the father, even if she was married and divorced, likewise the payment is to the father? The Gemara responds, Sovar Lok, Rabbi Akiva de Masnisen. Rabba, who's an Amora, simply holds like Rabbi Akiva of the Mishnah. And Rabbi Akiva of the Mishnah regards the Pashte Dekra, as we explained before, that the Knas is paid, but it's paid to her. And through that, we don't ignore the Pashte Dekra. So Rabba, on a personal level, doesn't have any problems. He simply says that the accurate understanding of Rabbi Akiva is Rabbi Akiva of the Mishnah, not of the Brisa. Tonu Rabbanan. Knasa Lemi. The thinking right now is that we're talking about a standard case of rape. And the Gemara, the Brisa is asking, the Knas payment is made to whom? So, first opinion, Lavia, it's made to the father. V'yesh omrim le'atzma. Another opinion says it's paid to her. Atzma, amai. We're asking a simple case, a standard case of rape. Why would you think she receives the money? When you look at the Torah, it says v'nostan lavia nahara. You pay the father. Omar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda said that this brief Tanaic source that we just read is not talking about a standard case of ones. It's benaro shenis arso v'nisgarsho askinon. It's about the very case we were discussing today of a nara that entered marriage and was divorced. The komifigi beplukta de Rabbi Akiva de Masnis and Rabbi Akiva de Brisa. And the two opinions reflected here represent the opinions that we saw in terms of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva of the Mishnah is the Bay's opinion, where the money is paid to the girl, and the Aleph opinion that says the payment of knas in the narash nizarsa and nizgarsha case is paid to the father, that is Rabbi Kiva of the Brisa. As you can see, we have a slash mark that indicates that which follows is a new topic, a new trend of thought. On the side of the Gemara, we have under the nosei, the topic heading, the following: Lo hispik oviha lahamido lamaanes badin ad shemesa. Father of a girl, and we're not talking about a girl that entered marriage anymore, a simple case of ones, single girl that was raped, and the father didn't have a chance to bring the offender, the rapist, to court until she died, until the victim, his daughter, died. Omar Abaye, Bo Olehu Mesa Potter. If the rape had taken place and the girl died before the father was able to bring him to court, so the offender is exempt from the knas payment. Shnema v'nosan lavi anara. The pasuk says the money is paid to the father of the nara. The word nara is a reference to the living daughter. V'lo lavi mesa. And this is this pasuk thereby excludes payment is not made to the father of a corpse, of a dead girl. So as far as Abaye is concerned, this topic is, we call it open and closed. It's a simple, straightforward point. Milsa de pshito le l'Abaye, mibayo le l'Rava. That which appears as a matter of fact, as a simple point to Abaye, is something that Rava had to grapple with. It was a question that Rava had. Now, here we have a Gemara that has a very, say, unique or maybe even complicated type structure. The brackets that we have here are explained on the side. There's a starred comment, Sograyim L'Shem Dilu. These brackets are for skipping purposes. Hezbollah Sograyim Elu Muva Barashi Lamiteso Manavdi Ramasil Mar Baravashi. The presence, the value of these brackets is featured in Rashi on Lamed Testament Aleph. The opening words Mar Baravashi you'll find about a little bit more than halfway, don't say halfway down the page, and a little bit beyond that there's a double star in the Rashi that we've placed. And if we skip to that momentarily, we read the following: Ulahai lishna de Mar Baravashi aliba de Rava. According to Mar Baravashi's version of Rava that appears on Lamed Testament Aleph, Omru Liel, it was said earlier, back on Lamed Ches, Amid Beis, the last phrase we read in the text, Milsa Dabshita Le'Labai Miboy Le'Rava. In other words, when we read Mar Baravashi, we'll then appreciate the Gemara's comment that we had just now. The Ilu Lelishna Kama, regarding the earlier version of Rava, not Mar Baravashi's version, but an earlier version of Rava, Mifshad Pshitale L'Rava de Mesa Lo Mafke'ab Udelo Kabaye. According to the earlier version of Rava, the fact that the girl dies does not cancel the obligation of paying. Unlike Abaye. Abaye said that Misa, the death of the girl, cancels the offender's obligation of paying. And Rava, as we just said, doesn't agree with Abaye. Calls man shelo bogra, as long as she hasn't reached Bogeres hood. But what's Bogeres hood? 12 and a half years of age. The fact that there was a rape and the girl died, and we're still in a time frame that the girl is under 12 and a half. The chikame bayale, what is a question to Rava is bebogger or bebeger bekever. Beggar bekever, beggar is from the expression bogeres. If let us say the rape took place when she was age-wise eligible, but the payment hadn't been made until an amount of time passed that the girl, had she been alive, would have gone over 12 and a half years of age. So that she will say, in figurative terms, she continues aging in the grave. That's Berger bekever. Kever is a grave. So even though the action took place within the offensive time frame, guilty age bracket of under 12 and a half, what happens if the payment had not been made or he hadn't been brought to court until that the time frame passed, and she would have been more than 12 and a half? That is a question that bothers Rava. But as Rashi goes on, but the fact that she simply died, Kozman Shelo Bogra, as long as we're within the Nara time period, she wouldn't have gone over 12 and a half years of age. The fact that she's merely dead, according to the first version of Rava, that would not have canceled the need for payment. V'chayav, and he's obligated, the rapist is still obligated to pay. So this Rashi, the Rashi we just read, is extremely helpful in presenting the overview of the Gemara. And as we said, it's only when we get to the Mar B'Rav Ashi version that you see on Lamed Tes Amud Aleph, almost halfway down. Always use your bracket length indicator, and you can see it's a vertical dash dotted line, and you just let your eye follow all the way, and you would get to the point in the Gemara where it says Mar B'Rav Ashi Boi Lo Hachi. The diamond is used to connect the different versions of Rava that are presented in the Gemara. So that Mar B'Rav Ashi's version of Rava is, and it's the third stage, or the third version, Misa Oise Bagrus O Ein Oise Bagrus, making the assumption that Bagrus, Berger, that voids the need for payment. And we spoke about being a Bogeres, having died, and the court case hadn't come to the fore until that time frame passed, and she's already would have been a Bogeres. Mar B'Rav Ashi's version has Rava asking, does Misa do the same thing? Misa Oise Bagrus O Ein Oise Bagrus. According to Abaye, it was clear. We said it was Pashat to Abaye that the Misa, the death of the girl, created a cancellation of the obligation to pay. We said Lavi Hanara V'lo Lavi Mesa. According to this version of Rava, that's the question. Is Misa a cancellation factor just like Bagrus or not? And at that point, the Gemara ends off with Teku. That remains unresolved. But until that point, there is a lot of work for us to do. We now go into the bracketed section, where Rava is introduced. We have a diamond, and on the side of them, under the Mivneh heading, you can see we have Gimel Lishonos, 3 versions, Shel HaShe'elah Hanogas Lahashpos Mises Haneneses Al Chiyuv HaTashlumin. Say 3 versions of what effect does the death of the victim have on the obligation to pay the rape fine, having raped a girl within we'll call the guilty time frame. Now the Gemara, Deboy Rava, and I know we're repeating ourselves, but this is the first version of Rava. This is not what the Gemara had in mind when it said Milsa de Pshita Leila Bayim Eboya Leila Rava. For that, you've got to wait till you get to Mar B'Rav Ashi. So in the meantime, Rava asks a question. Yesh Berger bekever or ain't Berger bekever? Now, we know that if a Bogeres is raped, so there's no we said before, earlier in today's shiur, Nara v'lo bogeres. A Nara will generate the knas payment, but not a bogeres, a girl over 12 and a half if she's raped, so the 50 shekel kesef payment is not made. We look at Rashi 3 or 4 lines from the bottom, the first of the wide lines under the Gemara text, Yesh Berger bekever, v'chi hechi di'im lo hispiko lamod bedin ad shebogra. Just like if the case was not brought to court until the girl went aged till over 12 and a half. Tanan lekamon, but perek narish nispatato. In the 4th perek, it is taught derehein la'atzmov lo lovia. If the girl had been raped and no court proceeding took place until she went over at 12 and a half years of age, the payment will then be made to the girl herself and not to the father. V'hashtanami, now too here in our discussion, Berger bekever mafkia koyach. Do we say, now here the girl is not alive, so it's not an issue of paying the girl, but it is the following would be the possibility that Berger bekever takes place, mafkia koyach, that would undo the father's claim on it, just like had she been alive and there was Hamoda Bedin after she reached Bagras, the payment would be made to her. So to here, where though she's dead, we say the clock keeps ticking, and she becomes a bogeres in the grave, and that will void the father's claim to the money. Ubeno yoresla im yesh la ben. This is a loaded statement. The Gemara will focus on this a little later, but in the meantime, it's saying that instead of her father having any legal claim to it, her son, if she happens to have a son, he'll have a claim to it. The son being the heir of the mother. Had the mother been alive, she would have received the payment. She's dead, so her son would receive the payment. So now we continue. We go back to the Gemara. Yesh Berger bekever utebenohave. Do we say that the clock keeps ticking even though she's in the grave, and if the Hamoda Bedin takes place, if the court case takes place now, as after she would have already been a bogeres, the payment will now be made to her son. Or Dilmo ain Berger bekever, or do we say no? Time freezes at the point she dies, so that she doesn't continue aging, so that she will remain a permanent na'ara, and the payment will go, like any case of a na'ara, to the father. The Gemara asks a 2-word question at the top of Lamed Tes Amud Aleph. Umima Abra. The way you presented the question is, will it go to the girl's son or to her father? But in order for it to go to the girl's son, you'd have to say that before she died, she was a na'ara, that she would be capable of conceiving and giving birth all while she's a na'ara. Does that exist? And then we have an internal angular brackets. If you skip the brackets, you notice you get to a point, Elahachi kamebayale. It's a second version of presenting the Rava question. In other words, the way we presented it till now is simply inaccurate. We're presenting a case where does the money go to her son or does it go to the girl's father? But we're going to prove in this angular bracketed section there can't be any son. We're now talking physiology, reproduction of the human species. It just doesn't take place within the time frame that was suggested. So therefore, if you're going to present the question, you'll have to present it a different way. And let's read the Roman numeral number 2 version before we go into the angular bracketed section. What would the question be then? So we have to leave the child out of the equation. Elahachi kamebayale. A girl was raped under 12 and a half years of age. She died. And the offender is brought to the court at a point in time that had the girl been alive, she would have been over 12 and a half. She would have been a bogeris already. So the question is, yesh beger bekever, does the clock continue ticking and she becomes a bogeris even though she's already dead? Upoka'av, and then the father would be dismissed. His claim would be cancelled. A father does not receive payment for a girl that's a bogeris. Rashi says, Upoka'av, just a couple lines down, Poko tvias av, v'zocha lo b'masha biyado. If you say that the father's claim is cancelled, so then the offender benefits by retaining the money. She'ein Baal Dino Kayam. His litigant, namely the Baal Dino, is the girl, but she's dead, so she's not around. Uknas lav momon hulo risho le'aviha b'toras yerusha. And the knas payment is not a momon payment. Momon is a reference to the world of money, a money payment, a standard financial payment which is subject to the rules of inheritance. But knas is not in that realm. It's not momon. It doesn't lend itself to inheritance. To the father, you should call kama de lo gafte. As long as it hasn't been collected, there's nothing to talk about in terms of rules of inheritance. So the father isn't in the position to inherit a knas payment. So do we say that yesh beger bekever and the father is thereby excluded? Or dilmo ein beger bekever velo poko av? Or do we say that the clock does not continue ticking and she remains a nara, and therefore the father's claim is not cancelled? Okay, we go back to the top line where we are dealing with the question of suggestion of the Rova question in Roman numeral number 1. Do we say yesh beger bekever, that the clock continues ticking, and instead of the father receiving the knas payment, her son would receive the knas payment? Or do we say, ein beger bekever, the clock does not continue ticking, and she remains a nara forever, and the father is the one who gets the payment? The Gemara had asked, Umima Abra, on the top line, does she become pregnant? That we can even make this suggestion that it should belong to the son. The Ha Tani Rav Bevai Kamei de Rav Nachman. Note, by the way, that all of this is a long question. Rav Bevai taught in the presence of Rav Nachman the following Tanaic source. There's a lot of information in this source, but we need to focus only on one aspect, and we'll try to do that with the markings. It says in this source, Sholosh Noshim Mishamshos B'moch. There are 3 types of women that the halacha sanctions the use of a contraceptive. The contraceptive in this case is a moch. Moch is a piece of soft material that a woman inserts to the female part of her anatomy, which will absorb the male seed, thereby preventing her from becoming pregnant. So there are 3 types of women that can use that. Eluhen ktana umuberes umenika. A minor, a pregnant woman, and a nursing woman. These are 3 women that we would not want her to become pregnant. And by the way, the bulk of this source is in accordance with Rabbi Meir. The Chachomim disagree with all of this, but we're focusing right now on the Rabbi Meir approach. The source elaborates on each one. Ketana, why is she mishameshes b'moch? Shemo tisaber v'tomus, we're afraid she might become pregnant, and since she's a minor, she might die from that. Muberes, an adult woman that's already pregnant, we don't want her to enter a second pregnancy while she's currently pregnant. Shemo tase ubrosando. The child that she's currently pregnant with might become flattened out by the development of a second embryo while she's already pregnant. And Menika, a woman who's currently nursing, we don't want her to become pregnant with a new child. Shemo tigmos b'no. It might force her to wean away her current infant that is dependent on her mother, on its mother's milk for its sustenance. When a woman becomes pregnant, so the lactation cycle stops, and the current infant will be endangered by having its food supply cut off. V'yezui katana, when we refer to katana in this source, now the word katana generally speaking means a minor, but here it's a qualified minor. What's the minor that's referred to in this source that would use a moch? A girl between the ages of 11 and 12. Less than 11 years of age, more than 12 years of age, she can engage in intimacy in a regular, moch-free fashion. That is Rebbe Meir's approach. What do we see from here? Now, there's a little starred note in the Rashi. Across from here, Alma bekatnus lo ma'abra shiavo lichlal leida. When she is a minor, she doesn't enter a pregnancy that leads to birth. It says she would die. Whereas under 11 years of age, she won't become pregnant. And at that point that she's between 11 and 12, if she becomes pregnant, she'll die. So there's no kid that's born. So how can you describe the Nara as having a kid, and that the knas payment might go to the child? There is no child. We're going to come back to this issue in a few lines, but first we continue in the source. V'chachomim omrim, the chachomim disagree with Rabbi Meir, and they say achazu v'achazu, whether it's this kind of girl or that kind of girl, mishameshes kedarka, she has intimacy in a regular way without a moch, v'holeches, and continues doing thusly, umina shamayim yirachamu, and from heaven there will be mercy. Shenema shomer psoim Hashem, the Almighty guards over those that lack knowledge, so that when it comes to whether it's a girl that's above 12 or under 12, the need for a moch according to Chomim is not necessary. Now, once again, we're focusing on within Rebbe Meir. The double underline is explained on the side under the mivneh, the structural note. We're going to try to see is there a possibility of a girl, when she's a Nara is above 12 years of age, can she actually become pregnant and have a kid, all within the Nara period of time? It's important for us to analyze this, because on Omid Aleph we were describing a girl who dies before she reaches Bogereshood, before she reaches that state of being 12 and a half. And the Gemara suggested that one of the possibilities is that money would be paid to her son. You might say that, well, she became pregnant at Na'arus. That means at age 12. At 12, she did not have to use the moch. It's not a danger for her to become pregnant at that age. So maybe she became pregnant as a Na'ara, and she gave birth as a Na'ara. That can't be, though, because the whole period of time of a Na'ara is a 6-month period. Within 6 months can a woman conceive and give birth? Shmuel tells us that Narus is a total of 6 months. The period of time between Katnus and Bagrus is 6 months. V'chitema, you might try to say botzirhu delekot feika, that when Shmuel says that the Narus is not less than 6 months, he means it's not less than, but it could be more than 6 months. That's not true either. Ella says ha ella komar. the dashed underline expression in the word in the previous line said Ella. That means that the Nara's period is only 6 months, i.e., not more and not less. So the Roman numeral number 1 presentation of Rava's deliberation is untenable. Elohachi komebayale. Rather, thusly Rava was asking: Yesh Berger bekever polka av, o dilmo ein Berger bekever velo polka av. To review, what Rava is sure of is that if as far as what Abaye was saying with certainty that you give to the Avi Nara, not Avi Mesa, Rava, up till this point, says even if the girl is dead, you still will give to the father. So what does Rava have as a question? What happens if the court case doesn't take place until a time that the girl, though she's dead, if she would be alive, she would be over 12 and a half years of age? And that's Yesh Berger Bekever, or as we said before, does the time continue ticking away while she's in the grave, and she continues aging while she's in the grave? And if that would be the case of Polka Av, and then the father's claim would be cancelled, El Dilma, or do we say Ein Berger Bekever Velo Polka Av? The clock doesn't continue running while she's in the grave, and the clock stopped when she was a Nara, and she is still viewed as a Nara, and the father's claim remains. More Barav Ashi boy lo hachi. More Barav Ashi presents Rava as follows: Misa oise bagrus o ein oise bagrus. Just like bagrus cancels the father's claim to the knas payment, does Misa do the same thing? The fact that the girl is dead, does that cancel the father's claim? And if it does, of course there's no kid, we already proved that before, so the offender will just keep the money. Or do we say that death does not accomplish the same thing as bagrus, and the father remains with his claim, and the offender would have to pay? Rava is not sure about then the power or the effects of Misa regarding the Knas payment. What about Abaye? Abaye was sure that the Misa cancels the father's claim. So, according to this version, Mar Bravashi's version of Rava, that which Abaye was sure of, Rava has as a question, Teku, and that remains unresolved.